What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? Lady Sarah Spencer never imagined that a routine business trip to New York would uncover a secret so explosive it could shake the very foundations of the British royal family. In a world where every move is watched and every word is measured, some truths are meant to remain hidden forever. But when Sarah accidentally witnesses a clandestine meeting in an upscale Manhattan hotel, she discovers that even 25 years after her sister Princess Diana's death, the royal drama is far from over. What she sees in that dimly lit hotel corridor will force her to question everything she thought she knew about her sister's legacy, and thrust her into a dangerous game of secrets, lies, and royal politics that threatens not just her own safety, but the stability of the monarchy itself. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Lady Sarah Spencer adjusted her pearl necklace as she stepped into the marble lobby of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. The October afternoon light filtered through the grand windows, casting elegant shadows across the polished floor. At 68, Sarah still carried herself with the poise that had once made her one of London's most sought-after debutantes, though the years had softened her sharp edges and added silver streaks to her auburn hair. She had arrived in New York 3 days earlier for a charity gala benefiting childhood literacy programs, a cause close to her heart since her sister Diana's passionate advocacy for children's welfare. The Spencer Family Foundation continued Diana's work, and Sarah had thrown herself into the mission with renewed vigor in recent years, finding purpose in preserving her sister's legacy. The hotel buzzed with its usual mix of international businesspeople, celebrities, and wealthy tourists. Sarah had chosen to stay at the Plaza not for its luxury, but for its discretion. The staff knew how to handle prominent guests without making a spectacle, something she had learned to value deeply after decades in the public eye as Princess Diana's older sister. As she made her way toward the elevator bank, her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant in London. The afternoon meetings had run longer than expected, and she was now running late for dinner with Margaret Whitman, an American philanthropist who had expressed interest in partnering with the Spencer Foundation. Sarah quickened her pace, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the 15th floor. The Plaza's elevators were known for their smooth, silent operation, but today something felt different. As the doors began to close, she heard a familiar laugh from the lobby behind her. The sound sent a chill down her spine. Sarah's hand shot out to stop the closing doors. She knew that laugh. It had haunted her dreams for years, featured prominently in countless news broadcasts, and echoed through the halls of Buckingham Palace during some of the most turbulent times in recent royal history. But it couldn't be. Not here. Not now. Peering through the gap in the elevator doors, Sarah scanned the lobby. Groups of well-dressed people moved about their business, chatting in multiple languages, their voices creating a gentle hum of sophisticated conversation. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. The stress of recent months, preparing for the upcoming anniversary of Diana's death, had been taking its toll. Then, she saw her. Camilla, the Queen Consort, stood near the concierge desk wearing an elegant navy blue coat and a silk headscarf that partially obscured her face. But Sarah would recognize that profile anywhere. She had studied it enough during the years of scandal and controversy that had surrounded Diana's marriage to Charles. What shocked Sarah wasn't just seeing Camilla in New York, but seeing her here, seemingly trying to maintain a low profile. Sarah's heart began to race. The royal family's travel schedules were usually public knowledge, especially for the Queen Consort. Official visits were announced weeks in advance, with detailed itineraries published in the court circular. If Camilla was in New York, why hadn't it been announced? And why the obvious attempt at disguise? The elevator doors began to close again, and this time Sarah let them. But instead of pressing 15, she jabbed the button for the lobby. She needed to understand what was happening. As the elevator descended, her mind raced through possibilities. Secret diplomatic missions weren't unheard of, but they typically involved the Foreign Office or senior government officials, not members of the royal family traveling alone. When the doors opened again, Sarah stepped out cautiously. The lobby was large enough that she could observe from a distance without being noticed. She positioned herself behind a large marble column adorned with fresh flowers, providing perfect cover while maintaining a clear view of the concierge area. Camilla was speaking quietly with a man Sarah didn't recognize. He was tall, perhaps in his early 60s, with silver hair and an expensive suit that screamed American wealth. His posture suggested confidence, authority, and, perhaps most intriguingly, familiarity with Camilla. This wasn't the formal, careful interaction she would expect between the queen consort and a stranger. Sarah pulled out her phone and pretended to scroll through emails while keeping her attention focused on the unfolding scene. The conversation appeared serious, with both parties checking their watches and glancing around the lobby nervously. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't a casual encounter. After several minutes, the man handed Camilla a small envelope. She tucked it quickly into her handbag without examining its contents, a gesture that spoke of practiced secrecy. They shook hands briefly, and then the man walked toward the hotel's main entrance while Camilla headed toward a different set of elevators. Sarah waited until both figures had disappeared before emerging from her hiding spot. Her mind was spinning with questions. Who was the American man? What was in the envelope? And, most importantly, why was the queen consort conducting what appeared to be clandestine business in a Manhattan hotel? She approached the concierge desk where Camilla had been standing, hoping to gather some information. The young woman behind the desk smiled professionally as Sarah approached. "Good evening, Lady Spencer. How may I assist you?" Sarah was momentarily surprised that the concierge knew her name, but then remembered that luxury hotels made it their business to know their prominent guests. "I thought I saw an old friend near your desk a moment ago, but I wasn't sure." A woman in a navy coat. The concierge's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Lady Spencer. We have many guests, and I'm not able to discuss other visitors." "Of course, I understand completely," Sarah replied smoothly. "Professional discretion is so important in your business." As Sarah walked away from the desk, she made a mental note of the concierge's reaction. The young woman definitely knew something, but the plaza's staff were clearly well-trained in maintaining guest privacy. Still, the fact that they were being discreet about Camilla's presence only confirmed Sarah's suspicion that this was no ordinary visit. She found herself standing in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the gentle chaos of evening activity. Guests were arriving for dinner, business meetings were concluding, and the hotel's elegant atmosphere continued unchanged. But, for Sarah, everything had shifted. The chance encounter had opened a door to questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Her phone buzzed again with another text from Margaret Whitman, wondering if she was still planning to attend dinner. Sarah realized she had been standing motionless for nearly 10 minutes, lost in thought about what she had witnessed. She quickly typed a response, explaining that she was running late, but would be there shortly. As she waited for the elevator, Sarah's reflection caught her eye in the polished brass doors. She looked exactly like what she was, a worried older sister trying to protect a legacy that had been built on both triumph and tragedy. Diana had been gone for 25 years, but the reverberations of her life and death continued to shape the royal family and, by extension, British public life. The elevator arrived, and this time Sarah pressed 15 without hesitation. As she rose toward her floor, she tried to process what she had seen. The rational part of her mind suggested that there could be many innocent explanations. Perhaps Camilla was in New York for private business. Perhaps the meeting was related to one of her charities. Perhaps Sarah had misread the entire situation. But her instincts told her otherwise. She had spent enough time around the royal family during Diana's marriage to recognize the signs of secretive behavior. The careful body language, the nervous glances, the quick exchange of what appeared to be documents or information. This had all the hallmarks of something significant and potentially problematic. Sarah's suite on the 15th floor was spacious and elegantly appointed, with large windows overlooking Central Park. Under normal circumstances, she would have taken a moment to appreciate the view and prepare for her evening. Instead, she found herself pacing the sitting area, her mind consumed with questions and possibilities. She thought about calling her brother Charles, Diana's younger brother, and the current Earl Spencer. But what would she say? That she had seen Camilla in New York and thought something seemed suspicious? Without more concrete information, she would sound paranoid at best and potentially damaging at worst. The Spencer family had worked hard to maintain their dignity and avoid unnecessary controversy in the years since Diana's death. Instead, Sarah decided to approach the situation methodically. If Camilla was indeed conducting some form of secret business in New York, there might be other signs. Hotel records, travel documentation, perhaps even media coverage that had been overlooked or deliberately suppressed. As someone who had spent decades navigating the intersection of public life and private business, Sarah knew how to research discreetly. She opened her laptop and began searching for any recent news about royal family travel to the United States. The official channels showed nothing about Camilla being in New York. King Charles was documented as being at Balmoral for the week, attending to routine royal business. There was no mention of the Queen consort traveling separately, which was unusual, but not unprecedented. Sarah then searched for information about high-profile events happening in New York that might attract royal attention. There were the usual array of charity galas, cultural events, and business conferences, but nothing that seemed to require the personal attention of the Queen consort. Certainly nothing that would justify a secret visit. As she continued her research, Sarah's phone rang. Margaret Whitman's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah realized she had been absorbed in her investigation for over an hour. Her dinner partner was undoubtedly wondering what had happened to her. "Margaret, I am so sorry," Sarah began as she answered the call. "I've been dealing with an unexpected situation, and I completely lost track of time." "Is everything all right, Sarah?" Margaret's voice carried genuine concern. "You sounded a bit distracted in your last text." Sarah paused, considering how much to reveal. Margaret was a longtime friend and had proven herself trustworthy over the years, but this situation was too delicate to discuss openly. "Just some family business that came up unexpectedly. Would it be possible to reschedule for tomorrow evening instead?" "Of course, dear. Family always comes first. But, Sarah, if there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask. I have quite a few connections here in New York, and sometimes an outside perspective can be valuable." The offer was generous, and Sarah filed it away for potential future consideration. "Thank you, Margaret. I truly appreciate that. Let me sort through things tonight, and perhaps we can discuss it over dinner tomorrow." After ending the call, Sarah returned to her laptop research. She expanded her search to include American business news, looking for any mentions of British royal family members or significant UK-US diplomatic activities. Most of the coverage was routine, but one small item caught her attention. A brief mention in a financial newsletter referenced increased UK interest in American technology partnerships, specifically mentioning high-level discussions between British and American entities regarding artificial intelligence development and regulatory frameworks. The article was vague and clearly written for industry insiders, but it suggested that significant business was being conducted between the two countries at levels that might not yet be public knowledge. Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering this new information. Could Camilla's presence in New York be related to some form of government business? It seemed unlikely that the Queen consort would be directly involved in technology negotiations, but the royal family had increasingly been called upon to support British business interests abroad. She was interrupted by a soft knock at her suite door. Room service, perhaps, though she hadn't ordered anything. Sarah approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. A hotel staff member stood in the hallway holding what appeared to be an envelope. "Lady Spencer," the young man called softly. "I have a message for you." Sarah opened the door, accepting the envelope with a polite thank you and a small tip. The hotel employee departed quickly, leaving her alone with what appeared to be a handwritten note on Plaza Hotel stationery. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a brief message written in careful script. "Some conversations are better held in private. The Oak Room Bar, 30 minutes. Come alone." The note wasn't signed, but Sarah's instincts told her it was connected to what she had witnessed in the lobby. Someone had seen her watching Camilla's meeting, and now they wanted to talk. The question was whether this represented an opportunity to get answers or a warning to mind her own business. Sarah checked her watch. It was nearly 8:30 in the evening. The Oak Room would be busy with the dinner crowd, which might provide good cover for a discreet conversation. On the other hand, it could also be a very public place to receive information she might not want to hear. She spent the next 20 minutes preparing for what could be a crucial conversation. She changed from her business attire into something more casual but still elegant, choosing a black dress that would help her blend into the restaurant's sophisticated atmosphere. She also made sure her phone was fully charged and easily accessible, in case she needed to record the conversation or call for help. As she prepared to leave her suite, Sarah caught her reflection in the mirror once more. She looked composed and confident, but inside she felt the familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety that had characterized so many moments during Diana's tumultuous years in the royal family. Once again, she was being drawn into a web of secrets and intrigue that she wasn't sure she was prepared to handle. The elevator ride to the lobby felt longer this time, giving Sarah more time to consider what she might be walking into. The note had been deliberately vague, which could mean the sender was being cautious or that they were trying to manipulate her into a vulnerable position. Either way, She was committed to finding out what they wanted to tell her. The Oak Room was indeed busy, filled with well-dressed diners enjoying expensive meals and engaging in the kind of animated conversations that characterized New York's social scene. Sarah scanned the room carefully, looking for anyone who might be waiting for her or watching her arrival. Near the back of the restaurant, in a corner booth that offered privacy and a clear view of the entrance, she spotted a woman sitting alone. As Sarah approached, the woman looked up and made eye contact. She was perhaps in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of understated elegance that suggested wealth and sophistication. More importantly, she looked familiar, though Sarah couldn't immediately place where she might have seen her before. "Lady Spencer," the woman said quietly as Sarah reached the table. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Sarah slid into the booth opposite the stranger, her senses heightened and her mind racing with questions. "You sent the note, I assume. And you are someone who believes you may have seen something tonight that could be very important to your family's interests," the woman replied carefully. "And someone who thinks you deserve to know what's really happening before it becomes public knowledge." The conversation that was about to unfold would change everything Sarah thought she knew about her sister's death, the royal family's secrets, and her own role in protecting Diana's legacy. But first, she needed to understand who this mysterious woman was and why she had chosen to approach her tonight. "I think," Sarah said quietly, "you had better start from the beginning." The woman across from Sarah adjusted her position in the booth, creating what appeared to be a more intimate conversation space, while maintaining her view of the restaurant's entrance. Her movements were calculated and professional, suggesting someone accustomed to conducting sensitive discussions in public places. "My name is Victoria Ashworth," she began, her accent carrying traces of both British and American influences. "I worked for the Foreign Office until 2019, specifically in the department that handled sensitive communications between the UK and US governments. What I'm about to tell you may be difficult to hear, but I believe you have a right to know." Sarah studied Victoria's face carefully, searching for signs of deception or manipulation. The woman's demeanor seemed genuine, but Sarah had learned during Diana's years in the royal family that appearances could be extraordinarily misleading. "Why would you approach me specifically? And how do you know what I may or may not have seen tonight?" Victoria reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather folder, placing it discreetly on the table between them. "Because 25 years ago, I was part of a team that investigated certain irregularities surrounding your sister's death. And because what happened in that lobby tonight suggests that some very dangerous people are still actively working to ensure that certain truths never come to light." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent years trying to find peace with the official explanation of Diana's death, accepting that the conspiracy theories and wild speculation were simply the product of public grief and unwillingness to accept that tragic accidents could claim even the most beloved figures. But Victoria's calm, professional tone suggested this wasn't about conspiracy theories at all. "What kind of irregularities?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The kind that suggested your sister's death wasn't the simple traffic accident it was made out to be," Victoria replied. "But before we discuss that, I need you to understand what you witnessed tonight and why it's so significant." Victoria opened the leather folder to reveal several photographs. The first showed Camilla entering the Plaza Hotel through a side entrance, clearly attempting to avoid the main lobby. The second showed her meeting with the same American man Sarah had observed, but from a different angle that revealed more detail about both figures. "The man Camilla met tonight is David Richardson," Victoria explained. "He's not just any American businessman. He's the head of a private intelligence firm that has been contracted by certain elements within the British establishment to handle what they call legacy management operations." Sarah stared at the photographs, trying to process what she was being told. Legacy management? What does that mean? It means ensuring that certain historical events maintain their official narrative, regardless of what the truth might actually be. Your sister's death created what some people considered to be dangerous loose ends. Questions that kept being asked, investigations that kept being demanded, conspiracy theories that refused to die. Richardson's firm specializes in making sure those loose ends stay tied up. The implications of what Victoria was suggesting began to dawn on Sarah. "You're saying that there are people actively working to suppress information about Diana's death?" "I'm saying that there are people who have invested significant time, money, and political capital in maintaining the current narrative. And recent developments have made them very nervous about their ability to continue doing so." Victoria turned to another photograph in the folder. This one showed a document with official-looking letterhead, though Sarah couldn't read the details from her position across the table. 3 weeks ago, a former French intelligence officer named Henri Montclair decided he wanted to unburden his conscience before he died. He's terminally ill with cancer and has perhaps 6 months to live. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. What does he know? Montclair was part of the team that secured the crash scene in Paris on the night your sister died. He claims to have evidence that certain pieces of evidence were deliberately overlooked or suppressed during the investigation. More importantly, he says he has documentation that proves there were other parties involved in the events leading up to the crash. The restaurant around them continued its normal evening rhythm, but, for Sarah, everything felt suspended in a moment of terrible clarity. What kind of documentation? Communication records, surveillance footage, and witness statements that were never officially recorded. Montclair kept copies as insurance, which was apparently common practice among intelligence officers who worked on high-profile cases. He never intended to use them, but his illness has changed his perspective. Victoria paused to take a sip of water, giving Sarah time to absorb what she had heard so far. The problem is that Montclair doesn't just want to release this information to the media. He wants to ensure it reaches the right people who can handle it responsibly and protect innocent parties from unnecessary harm. And he contacted you because of your background with the Foreign Office? Actually, he contacted me because of my connection to the original investigation. But I'm no longer in a position to handle this kind of sensitive material through official channels. That's where the current situation becomes complicated. Sarah was beginning to understand the web of connections that had led to this moment. Richardson's firm found out about Montclair's intentions. Exactly. And they've been tasked with either acquiring the documentation quietly or ensuring that Montclair decides not to proceed with his plan. Tonight's meeting between Camilla and Richardson was about coordinating the final phase of their strategy. The envelope that Sarah had seen Camilla receive suddenly took on new significance. What was in the envelope? If my sources are correct, it contained authorization for a very generous financial offer to Montclair's family. Enough money to ensure his wife and children are comfortable for the rest of their lives, in exchange for his silence. Sarah felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. They're trying to buy his silence. It's actually more sophisticated than that. They're offering to establish a charitable foundation in his name, focused on cancer research and intelligence officer welfare. Very respectable, very public, and very effective at making any refusal seem selfish and unreasonable. The cynicism of the approach was breathtaking. By framing the offer as a charitable opportunity, they made it nearly impossible for Montclair to refuse without appearing to harm cancer research and veterans' welfare. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated pressure campaign that Sarah had watched destroy other people who had tried to speak out about royal family secrets. But why involve Camilla directly? Surely this kind of thing could be handled through intermediaries. Victoria's expression became more serious. Because Montclair specifically requested that any negotiation involve someone with direct access to the royal family. He wants assurance that his information will be taken seriously at the highest levels, not buried in some bureaucratic process. Camilla's presence serves as proof that the monarchy itself is engaged with his concerns. Sarah realized that she was now in possession of information that could potentially reshape public understanding of her sister's death. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but she also felt a familiar surge of protective anger that had sustained her through many difficult periods since Diana's death. What happens if Montclair accepts their offer? His documentation disappears, he signs a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and the official narrative remains intact. In 6 months or less, when he dies, any remaining questions die with him. And if he refuses? Victoria's pause was telling. That's where things become more complicated and potentially more dangerous. Richardson's firm has other methods for ensuring compliance, methods that don't rely on voluntary cooperation. The implication was clear, and Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. You're suggesting they would threaten him or his family? I'm suggesting that they have the capability and motivation to use whatever pressure is necessary to achieve their objectives. Montclair is an elderly man with a terminal illness and a family he wants to protect. He's vulnerable to many different forms of persuasion. Sarah looked around the restaurant, suddenly, aware that their conversation might be observed or overheard. The normal evening crowd continued their meals and conversations, oblivious to the life and death discussion taking place in the corner booth. Why are you telling me this? What do you expect me to do with this information? Victoria closed the leather folder and returned it to her handbag. Because Montclair specifically requested that Diana's family be informed about his situation before he makes his final decision. He feels that they have the right to know what evidence exists and to have input into how it's handled. When does he need to make his decision? The offer expires in 72 hours. After that, Richardson's firm moves to what they call alternative strategies. Sarah felt the urgency of the situation pressing down on her. 3 days to understand 25 years of hidden truth and decide how to protect both her sister's legacy and a dying man's family. The complexity of the moral and practical considerations was staggering. How can I contact Montclair? If he wants the family's input, he should have it. Victoria smiled for the first time since their conversation began. I was hoping you would say that. He's currently in a private medical facility in Geneva, receiving experimental treatment that may extend his life by a few weeks or months. I can arrange for you to speak with him, but it would have to be done very carefully. What do you mean? Richardson's firm is almost certainly monitoring his communications. Any contact would need to be arranged through secure channels, and you would need to be prepared for the possibility that your own activities might come under scrutiny as a result. The prospect of being monitored or threatened by private intelligence operatives was deeply unsettling, but Sarah knew that Diana would have wanted her to pursue the truth regardless of personal risk. Her sister had never backed down from difficult situations when important principles were at stake. What would you need from me to arrange contact with Montclair? Your commitment that you will handle whatever information he shares responsibly, and your understanding that once you know what he knows, you become part of the situation. There's no going back to ignorance or plausible deniability. Sarah considered the weight of that commitment. Once she crossed this line, she would be obligated to act on whatever she learned, regardless of how complicated or dangerous it might be. But the alternative was allowing potentially crucial evidence about Diana's death to be suppressed forever. I understand the risks. Set up the meeting. Victoria nodded approvingly. I'll need 24 hours to make the arrangements. In the meantime, you should continue with your normal schedule here in New York. Don't do anything that might suggest you're involved in sensitive business. What about Camilla? Should I be concerned about her knowing that I saw the meeting? Hotel security footage will show that you were in the lobby at the time of their meeting, but that could be explained as coincidence. Unless you give them reason to suspect otherwise, they'll likely assume you didn't recognize the significance of what you saw. Victoria stood to leave, but Sarah stopped her with a final question. Why are you risking yourself to help expose this? What's your motivation? The older woman paused, and, for the first time, Sarah saw a genuine emotion in her face. Because 25 years ago, I was part of a system that helped bury the truth about your sister's death. I told myself it was for the greater good, to protect national security and prevent public chaos. But Diana deserved better than that. Her sons deserved better, and her memory deserves better. With that, Victoria left the restaurant, disappearing into the evening crowd of New York City. Sarah remained in the booth for several more minutes, trying to process everything she had learned and everything that now lay ahead of her. The next 24 hours would be crucial for maintaining the appearance of normalcy while preparing for what could be the most important conversation of her life. Sarah had spent years trying to find peace with the official version of Diana's death, but now she was being offered the chance to uncover the truth, regardless of how painful or complicated it might be. As she finally left the Oak Room and returned to her suite, Sarah realized that her quiet life as a charitable foundation director was about to become something far more complex and dangerous. But, for the first time since Diana's death, she felt that she might finally be able to do something meaningful to honor her sister's memory and ensure that the truth, whatever it was, would not be buried forever. The next morning would bring new challenges and the beginning of what could be either a quest for justice or a journey into territory from which there might be no safe return. But tonight, Sarah Spencer was no longer just Diana's surviving sister. She was a woman with a mission and the determination to see it through, regardless of the cost. Sarah barely slept that night. She found herself staring at the ceiling of her plaza suite, watching the patterns of light from passing cars play across the ornate molding while her mind raced through everything Victoria Ashworth had revealed. By dawn, she had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. She was going to take whatever steps were necessary to uncover the truth about Diana's death, regardless of the personal consequences. The morning began with a call from her assistant in London. "Lady Spencer, I have several items for your review," came the familiar voice of Mrs. Pemberton, who had managed Sarah's professional life with military precision for over a decade. Lord Ashford's office called about the autumn fundraiser, and there are 3 media requests regarding the upcoming anniversary memorial service. Sarah listened to the routine business while watching the sunrise paint Central Park in shades of gold and amber. The normalcy of the call felt surreal given what she now knew about the forces working to suppress evidence about her sister's death. Please handle the fundraiser details as you see fit, Mrs. Pemberton. As for the media requests, I'm not prepared to make any statements at this time. Very good, my lady. Will you be returning to London as scheduled on Friday? Sarah paused, realizing that her travel plans might need to change depending on what she learned from Henri Montclair. I may need to extend my stay by several days. I'll confirm the details with you tomorrow. After ending the call, Sarah ordered breakfast from room service and began preparing for what she hoped would be a call from Victoria. The waiting was almost unbearable, but she forced herself to maintain normal routines while staying alert for any signs that she was being watched or followed. Her breakfast arrived with the morning newspapers, and Sarah was struck by the disconnect between the mundane headlines and the explosive secrets she now carried. The financial pages reported on trade negotiations, the society pages covered charity events, and the international section discussed diplomatic developments. Nothing about secret intelligence operations or suppressed evidence about the most famous royal death of the 20th century. At precisely 10 o'clock, her phone rang with a call from an unknown international number. Sarah answered cautiously. Lady Spencer, this is Victoria. I hope you're prepared to travel. Our mutual acquaintance would like to meet with you this afternoon in Geneva. The speed of the arrangement was both encouraging and unsettling. This afternoon? That seems very sudden. Time is a luxury we don't have. There are indications that our opponents are accelerating their timeline. Henri received another visit yesterday evening, this time from someone representing Richardson's firm directly. The pressure is mounting. Sarah felt a surge of protective anger. They're intimidating a dying man. They're doing whatever they consider necessary to protect their interests, which is why we need to move quickly. Can you be at JFK Airport by noon? What should I tell people about why I'm traveling to Switzerland? You're visiting a medical facility that's pioneering new cancer treatment research, something that fits perfectly with your charitable work. I've already arranged for the Spencer Foundation to receive an invitation to tour their facilities. The cover story was clever and believable, giving Sarah legitimate reasons to be in Geneva while providing access to the facility where Montclair was receiving treatment. What about security? If Richardson's people are monitoring the situation, won't they notice my arrival? Possibly, but by the time they realize what's happening, you'll already have spoken with Henri. Sometimes the best strategy is to move too quickly for opposition forces to react effectively. Sarah made her decision. I'll be at JFK by noon. What do I need to know about the meeting itself? Henri is very ill, so the conversation will need to be brief and focused. He's also extremely cautious about what he says and to whom he says it. You'll need to convince him that you're someone he can trust with information that could be dangerous to many people. How do I do that? By being honest about your motivations and demonstrating that you understand the gravity of what you're asking him to share. Henri has been carrying these secrets for 25 years. He needs to believe that revealing them will serve justice, not just satisfy curiosity. After hanging up with Victoria, Sarah moved quickly to pack for the unexpected trip. She chose clothing that would be appropriate for both medical facility visits and potentially more clandestine meetings. More importantly, she gathered documentation that would establish her credibility with Montclair, including letters from Diana that might demonstrate the depth of their relationship and her commitment to protecting her sister's memory. The taxi ride to JFK gave Sarah time to consider what questions she most needed to ask Montclair. She realized that she didn't just want to know what evidence he possessed, but also why he had decided to come forward after so many years of silence. Understanding his motivations would be crucial to evaluating the reliability of his claims. The flight to Geneva was long enough for Sarah to research Henri Montclair more thoroughly. Using the airplane's Wi-Fi, she found sparse but intriguing information about his career in French intelligence. He had specialized in international security operations and had received several commendations for his work on sensitive cases. More importantly, she found references to his involvement in the investigation of Princess Diana's death, though the details were classified or heavily redacted. Upon landing in Geneva, Sarah was met by a driver who identified himself only as Marcus, and who seemed to know exactly where to take her without being given an address. The ride through the Swiss countryside was beautiful, but Sarah found herself checking the mirrors frequently to see if they were being followed. The paranoia that had been building since her encounter with Victoria was becoming more acute as she moved deeper into what felt like a world of professional secrets and hidden agendas. The medical facility was an imposing modern building nestled in the hills outside Geneva, clearly designed to provide both advanced medical care and complete privacy for its patients. The kind of place where wealthy individuals could receive treatment without media attention or public scrutiny. Marcus led Sarah through a series of security checkpoints and administrative procedures that felt more like entering a diplomatic compound than a hospital. Finally, they arrived at a private wing where Victoria was waiting in an elegant sitting area. "How was your flight?" Victoria asked, though her tone suggested the question was more about maintaining normal appearances than genuine curiosity. "Productive. I had time to think about what I want to ask him." "Good. Before we go in, you should know that Henry's condition has deteriorated somewhat since yesterday. The stress of the situation isn't helping his health, and his doctors are concerned about the impact of too much emotional strain." Sarah nodded, understanding that she would need to be both thorough and compassionate in her approach. "How long do we have?" "Perhaps 30 minutes before his medical team insists on ending the meeting. He's scheduled for treatment this afternoon that will leave him unable to communicate clearly for the rest of the day." Victoria led Sarah down a quiet corridor lined with artwork that seemed chosen to provide comfort and tranquility. At the end of the hall, she stopped in front of a door marked only with a number and knocked softly. "Entrez," came a weak voice from within. Henri Montclair was smaller than Sarah had expected, diminished by illness but still possessing the alert eyes and careful posture of someone accustomed to evaluating threats and opportunities. He was sitting in a comfortable chair near a large window that offered views of Lake Geneva, and despite his obvious illness, he was impeccably dressed in a way that suggested personal dignity remained important to him. "Lady Spencer," he said in English accented by years of international work, "I am honored that you would travel so far to speak with an old man." Sarah approached him carefully, extending her hand in greeting. His grip was weak, but steady. "Monsieur Montclair, I'm grateful for the opportunity to hear what you have to say. Victoria has explained that you have information about my sister's death. Please sit." Henri gestured to a chair positioned near his own. "What I have to tell you will be difficult to hear, but I believe you deserve to know the truth about what happened in Paris 25 years ago." Sarah settled into the chair, acutely aware that the next few minutes could change everything she thought she knew about the most traumatic event in her family's history. "I'm prepared to listen." Henri studied her face carefully before beginning. "Your sister's death was not an accident, Lady Spencer. It was the result of a deliberate operation designed to appear accidental while achieving specific political objectives." The words landed with the force of a physical blow, even though Sarah had been somewhat prepared for such a revelation. "What kind of operation? Who was responsible?" "The operation was conceived and executed by a joint British-French intelligence team, with support from private contractors and certain members of the royal household staff. The objective was to eliminate what was perceived as a growing threat to the stability of the monarchy and the political relationship between Britain and several allied nations." Sarah felt the room spinning slightly as she tried to process what she was hearing. Diana was perceived as a threat? How? Your sister had become increasingly independent and vocal about issues that conflicted with official British foreign policy. Her anti-landmine campaign was damaging arms industry relationships. Her humanitarian work was creating diplomatic complications. Most significantly, her relationship with Dodi Fayed was seen as politically dangerous. Henri paused to sip water from a glass on the table beside him, clearly struggling with both his physical condition and the emotional weight of what he was revealing. The final decision to act was made when intelligence reports suggested that Diana was planning to marry Fayed and convert to Islam. The perception among certain powerful individuals was that having a former Princess of Wales, mother of a future king, married to a Muslim and advocating for Palestinian rights would create unacceptable risks to British interests in the Middle East. Sarah felt a mixture of horror and recognition. She remembered the frantic phone calls from Diana in the weeks before her death, the sense that her sister felt increasingly isolated and under pressure from forces she couldn't clearly identify. How was it carried out? Henry's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The crash itself was genuine. What was engineered were the circumstances that led to it. The driver, Henri Paul, was not just drunk as reported. He had been drugged with a specific combination of substances designed to impair his judgment and reaction time while leaving traces that could be attributed to alcohol and prescription medications he was known to take. You're saying he was deliberately incapacitated? The drugs were administered through a drink he consumed at the Ritz Hotel, delivered by someone he trusted. The paparazzi chase that night was also orchestrated, with certain photographers being fed information about Diana's departure time and route. The goal was to create a high-stress driving situation with an impaired driver. Sarah realized that what Henri was describing was a sophisticated assassination disguised as a tragic accident resulting from media harassment and driver error. The elegance and deniability of the approach was chilling. What evidence do you have to support these claims? Henri reached for a small briefcase beside his chair, opening it to reveal several folders and what appeared to be recording devices. I was part of the team responsible for securing the crash scene and controlling the initial investigation. I made copies of communications, witness statements that were later altered or suppressed, and surveillance footage that showed the preparation phase of the operation. He handed Sarah a folder containing what appeared to be photographs and document excerpts. These are copies of the most significant materials. The originals are in a secure location, along with my detailed written account of the entire operation. Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands. The first document appeared to be a communication transcript between British and French intelligence operatives discussing Operation Blackbird and its timeline. Even reading just the first few lines, she could see references to the target, asset neutralization, and post-incident narrative control. This is evidence of murder, she said quietly. It is evidence of a state-sponsored assassination carried out by professional intelligence operatives acting on behalf of what they believe to be essential national security interests, Henri corrected. The people involved were not criminals in the traditional sense. They were dedicated servants of their respective governments who believed they were protecting important strategic relationships and preventing potential national security crises. Sarah looked up from the documents, struggling to reconcile Henry's matter-of-fact tone with the enormity of what he was revealing. Why did you participate? And why are you coming forward now? Henri was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Lake Geneva. I participated because I was a professional intelligence officer following orders from my superiors, who assured me that the operation was necessary to prevent greater harm. I believed that Diana's actions, however well-intentioned, were creating risks that could destabilize important international relationships. And now I am dying, and I have had 25 years to consider whether we made the right choice. I have watched Diana's sons grow into admirable men who have honored their mother's memory. I have seen the positive changes that her humanitarian work inspired continue to benefit millions of people. I have come to believe that we eliminated someone who was making the world better because we were afraid of political inconvenience. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, both from grief and from a strange sense of vindication. For years, she had struggled with the feeling that something about the official explanation of Diana's death didn't make sense. Now she knew why. What happens now? What do you want me to do with this information? Henri leaned forward slightly, his voice gaining strength despite his physical weakness. That decision must be yours, Lady Spencer. I can tell you what I believe should happen, but ultimately, you must decide how to honor your sister's memory and protect her sons from unnecessary pain. What do you believe should happen? I believe the truth should be revealed in a way that achieves justice without destroying innocent people or destabilizing important institutions. The individuals who ordered and carried out this operation should be held accountable, but in a manner that recognizes the complex political realities they were trying to address. Sarah realized that Henri was asking her to become something she had never wanted to be, a person responsible for decisions that could affect the monarchy, the British government, and the lives of many individuals who had been involved in or affected by Diana's death. How much time do I have to decide? Richardson's people have given me until tomorrow evening to accept their offer. After that, they will likely take more aggressive measures to ensure my silence. If you're going to act on this information, it needs to happen very quickly. Victoria, who had been quietly observing from near the door, stepped forward. Lady Spencer, we need to discuss your options and their implications. Henri needs to rest now, but we can continue this conversation privately. Sarah stood to leave, but Henri caught her hand gently. Your sister was a remarkable woman who died because powerful people feared her independence and moral courage. Whatever you decide to do with what I have told you, please remember that she deserved better than what happened to her. As Sarah left Henry's room, she carried with her not just explosive evidence about Diana's death, but also the terrible responsibility of deciding how to use it. The next few hours would determine whether 25 years of hidden truth would finally be revealed or whether the secrets would remain buried forever. Victoria led Sarah to a private conference room within the medical facility, a sterile but comfortable space that offered complete privacy for their crucial conversation. As they settled into leather chairs around a small table, Sarah felt the weight of Henry's revelations pressing down on her like a physical force. "I need you to understand the full scope of what you're now involved in," Victoria began, her tone more serious than it had been during their previous meetings. "The evidence Henri has shared with you could potentially bring down several governments, destroy the careers of dozens of intelligence operatives, and create a constitutional crisis in Britain." Sarah placed the folder Henri had given her on the table between them. "But it could also provide justice for Diana and answers for her sons." "Yes, but at what cost? William and Harry have built their lives and careers around honoring their mother's memory while maintaining their positions within the royal family. Learning that their father's government orchestrated their mother's death could destroy them psychologically and politically." The complexity of the situation was becoming clearer to Sarah. This wasn't simply about revealing hidden truth. It was about weighing the potential benefits of justice against the definite harm that revelation could cause to innocent people, including Diana's own children. "What are my realistic options?" Sarah asked. Victoria opened her own briefcase and removed several documents. "I've prepared 3 different scenarios, each with its own risks and potential outcomes. The first is complete disclosure through mainstream media channels." She placed a folder marked Option A on the table. This would involve providing Henry's evidence to reputable journalists who could verify the claims and publish a comprehensive exposé. The advantage is maximum transparency and accountability. The disadvantage is that it would create a media firestorm that could consume everyone involved, including Diana's sons, Charles, and even you. Sarah considered this option carefully. What would be the likely outcome for the people who were actually responsible? Most of the operational personnel are either dead or retired from active service. The political figures who authorized the operation would face intense scrutiny, but could likely avoid legal consequences due to the time that has passed and the classified nature of the evidence. The primary result would be massive public outrage and political instability. Victoria moved to the second folder. Option B is controlled disclosure through official channels. This would involve approaching the current British government privately and negotiating a process for acknowledging what happened while managing the public release of information. What would that look like practically? Something similar to what happened with historical cases like the Hillsborough disaster or the Bloody Sunday inquiry. A formal investigation that acknowledges wrongdoing and provides some measure of justice while controlling the narrative to minimize broader political damage. Sarah appreciated the appeal of this approach, but she was skeptical about trusting the same institutional systems that had covered up Diana's murder for 25 years. Would there be any guarantee that such an investigation would be honest and comprehensive? No guarantees, but it would provide some measure of official acknowledgement and could lead to reforms in how intelligence operations are authorized and conducted. The risk is that it could also be used to whitewash the truth while creating the appearance of accountability. Victoria placed the third folder on the table. Option C is strategic silence with conditions. This would involve accepting Richardson's offer to Montclair, but negotiating additional terms that provide some measure of justice without public disclosure. What kind of terms? Financial compensation for Diana's estate, establishment of a major humanitarian foundation in her name funded by the guilty parties, and private acknowledgement of what happened along with guarantees that similar operations would never be authorized again. Sarah found herself torn between her desire for public justice and her concern for protecting Diana's sons from additional trauma. What does Henri want me to do? He's left the decision entirely to you, but he's indicated that he would be comfortable with any option that provides some measure of acknowledgement and accountability. His primary concern is ensuring that his own family is protected regardless of what path you choose. Sarah realized she needed to consider not just what Diana would have wanted, but what would best serve the principles her sister had fought for during her life. Diana had always prioritized helping vulnerable people over personal vengeance or political point scoring. "I need to understand something," Sarah said. "If I choose complete disclosure, what happens to Henry's family? And what happens to you?" Victoria's expression grew more serious. Henry's family would likely face intense media attention and possible retaliation from intelligence services in multiple countries. They could be painted as traitors or attention seekers, regardless of their father's motivations. As for me, I would almost certainly face prosecution under the Official Secrets Act and would likely spend the rest of my life in prison. And if I choose strategic silence, Henry's family receives financial security and protection. I remain free but carry the knowledge that we allowed a state-sponsored murder to remain officially unsolved. The people responsible continue to benefit from their silence, while Diana's memory continues to be defined by a lie. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Swiss mountains while trying to process the moral complexity of her situation. Every option involved significant sacrifices and uncertain outcomes. There was no clear path that would provide perfect justice without causing additional harm. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it and found a message from an unknown number. Lady Spencer, we know about your meeting with Montclair. Contact us within 6 hours to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution. Failure to respond will force us to protect our interests through other means. Sarah showed the message to Victoria, who read it with obvious concern. Richardson's people work quickly. They must have had surveillance on the medical facility. Is that a threat? It's a warning that they're prepared to take more aggressive action if they can't resolve the situation through negotiation. These are people who have successfully suppressed evidence of a royal assassination for 25 years. They have considerable resources and few scruples about how they use them. Sarah felt a surge of anger that helped clarify her thinking. They're threatening me because I want justice for my sister's murder. They're protecting what they consider to be vital national security interests. From their perspective, you're a threat to institutional stability and international relationships. And, from my perspective, they're criminals who killed Diana and have spent 25 years covering it up. Victoria nodded approvingly. Good. Anger can be useful if you channel it constructively. But you need to be smart about how you proceed. These people are professionals with significant advantages in terms of resources and operational experience. Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. I want to meet with them. That could be extremely dangerous. Perhaps, but it's also the only way to understand what they're really prepared to do and what they might be willing to negotiate. If I'm going to make an informed decision about how to proceed, I need to know what all parties are actually offering. Victoria considered this for a moment. If you're serious about that, we would need to take extensive precautions. These people are capable of making someone disappear permanently if they decide negotiation isn't possible. What kind of precautions? Multiple witness protections, recorded communications, public location, and emergency protocols if something goes wrong. We would also need to establish clear boundaries about what you're willing to discuss and what information you'll keep in reserve. Sarah realized that she was crossing another line in her transformation from private citizen to active participant in a complex intelligence operation. But the alternative was allowing Diana's killers to intimidate her into silence, something she was no longer willing to accept. Set up the meeting. Victoria made several phone calls over the next hour, speaking in careful language that was obviously coded but conveying her message effectively. Finally, she turned back to Sarah with the arrangements. Tomorrow at noon, Café de la Paix near Lake Geneva. Public location with multiple exit routes and good surveillance opportunities for both parties. Richardson will attend personally, along with one associate. You can bring me as your advisor. What should I prepare for? They'll likely offer you a version of what they offered Henri, but tailored to your specific circumstances. Financial benefits, charitable opportunities, perhaps even honorary positions that would give you a platform to advocate for causes Diana cared about. The goal will be to make refusing their offer seem selfish and counterproductive. Sarah spent the rest of the day reviewing Henry's evidence more thoroughly and considering what she most needed to learn from her meeting with Richardson. The documents were damning in their detail, but she wanted to understand not just what had happened, but why the people involved believed it was justified. That evening, she had dinner with Henri one final time before his scheduled treatment. Despite his obvious fatigue, he seemed more at peace than he had during their earlier meeting. Have you decided what you will do? He asked over a simple meal in his private room. I'm going to meet with the people who are trying to silence you. I want to understand their perspective before I make my final decision. Henri nodded approvingly. That is wise. They are not evil people, Lady Spencer. They are professionals who believe they were protecting important interests. Understanding their motivations will help you decide how to achieve justice without creating unnecessary destruction. Do you regret your involvement in what happened to Diana? Every day for 25 years. But I have learned that regret without action is merely self-indulgence. By coming forward now, I am trying to transform my regret into something constructive. What would you want Diana to know, if she could know? Henri was quiet for a long moment. That she died because she was too good for the world she lived in. And that her death has haunted everyone involved in ways that the people who ordered it never anticipated. As Sarah prepared to leave, Henri handed her one final item, a sealed envelope marked with her name. This contains the location of my complete files and the access codes necessary to retrieve them. If something happens to me before this situation is resolved, you will have everything you need to pursue whatever course of action you believe is appropriate. Sarah tucked the envelope into her handbag, understanding that she now possessed the complete power to expose one of the most significant cover-ups in modern history. The question was whether she would use that power, and if so, how. That night, as she prepared for her confrontation with Richardson and his associates, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since she had spotted Camilla in the Plaza Hotel lobby. She had gone from being a private citizen focused on charitable work to being the keeper of explosive state secrets, and the person responsible for deciding how to balance justice, truth, and the welfare of innocent people. Tomorrow's meeting would determine not just the future of Henry's evidence, but also Sarah's own role in either exposing or protecting one of the most carefully guarded secrets of the modern era. She fell asleep knowing that she was as prepared as she could be for a conversation that would define the rest of her life and potentially reshape public understanding of her sister's death. Whatever happened at Café de la Paix, Sarah Spencer was no longer the same woman who had traveled to New York for a routine charity event. She was now a player in a complex game of secrets and power, determined to honor Diana's memory while protecting the innocent people who could be harmed by the truth. The morning of the meeting dawned crisp and clear over Lake Geneva, with autumn sunlight casting golden reflections across the water. Sarah had barely slept, but she felt more focused and determined than she had since this entire situation began. She dressed carefully in a dark blue suit that conveyed both professionalism and authority, knowing that her appearance would be part of the psychological dynamics of her confrontation with Richardson. Victoria arrived at Sarah's hotel at 10:30, carrying what appeared to be a high-end handbag but which Sarah suspected contained recording equipment and other surveillance tools. They reviewed their strategy one final time over coffee in Sarah's suite. "Remember that everything they offer you will sound reasonable and appealing," Victoria warned. "These people are experts at making their targets feel like cooperation is in everyone's best interest. Don't let them reframe the conversation in their terms." Sarah nodded, understanding that she needed to maintain control of both the narrative and her own emotional responses during what was certain to be a carefully orchestrated attempt at manipulation. What if they threaten me directly? They won't. That would be counterproductive and potentially create evidence that could be used against them later. Instead, they'll help you understand the negative consequences that could result from non-cooperation, while making it seem like you're choosing those consequences rather than having them imposed on you. The taxi ride to Café de la Paix gave Sarah time to center herself mentally for what could be the most important conversation of her life. She thought about Diana's courage during her final years, when she had faced similar pressure from powerful forces who wanted to control her actions and silence her voice. Café de la Paix was exactly as Victoria had described, a public location that offered both visibility and multiple escape routes. Sarah and Victoria arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table that provided good sight lines while allowing for private conversation. The Autumn Cafe crowd provided perfect cover for their meeting. At exactly noon, two men approached their table. The first was David Richardson, the American intelligence contractor Sarah had seen meeting with Camilla at the Plaza Hotel. He was taller and more imposing in person, with the kind of calm confidence that suggested extensive experience in high-stakes negotiations. The second man was younger, perhaps in his 40s, with the alert posture and careful eyes of someone accustomed to evaluating threats and opportunities. "Lady Spencer," Richardson said as he took the seat across from her, "I appreciate your willingness to meet with us. I believe we can find a resolution to this situation that serves everyone's interests." Sarah studied his face carefully, looking for signs of the ruthless intelligence operative who had orchestrated 25 years of cover-up. What she saw instead was a professional who genuinely seemed to believe he was protecting important principles and relationships. "Mr. Richardson," Sarah replied, "I'm here to understand your perspective before I decide how to proceed with the information I've obtained about my sister's death." Richardson nodded approvingly. "Direct and honest. I appreciate that approach. Let me be equally direct with you. What happened to Princess Diana was a tragedy that resulted from a complex set of circumstances and decisions made by people who were trying to protect vital national interests. You're saying her death was justified? I'm saying her death was the unintended consequence of an operation designed to address legitimate security concerns. The people involved were not murderers in the conventional sense. They were professionals dealing with what they perceived as a growing threat to international stability. The younger man, who had been introduced simply as Collins, leaned forward slightly. Lady Spencer, your sister had become involved with individuals and causes that were creating significant diplomatic problems for multiple governments. Her relationship with Dodi Fayed wasn't just a personal matter. It was becoming a political complication that could have affected Middle Eastern policy for decades. Sarah felt her anger rising but forced herself to remain calm. So you killed her to prevent diplomatic inconvenience? Richardson's expression remained neutral. We attempted to manage a situation that was escalating beyond anyone's ability to control through conventional means. The operation was designed to create circumstances that would naturally discourage her more problematic relationships and activities. Her death was an unintended outcome of that effort. You drugged her driver and orchestrated a high-speed chase through Paris. How was her death unintended? Collins answered this time. The goal was to create a controlled crisis that would demonstrate the dangers of her current lifestyle choices. The expectation was that she would survive with minor injuries, but would be sufficiently shaken to reconsider her associations and activities. Sarah realized that what they were describing was a psychological operation gone wrong rather than a deliberate assassination. The distinction was important because it suggested that the people involved might genuinely have regretted the outcome, even if they remained convinced that their original objectives were legitimate. Why should I believe anything you're telling me? You've spent 25 years covering this up. Richardson leaned back in his chair, considering his response carefully. Because we're offering to provide you with information that could help you understand your sister's final weeks more completely. There were aspects of her life during that period that have never been made public, aspects that might change your perspective on what happened. What kind of information? Evidence that Diana herself had become aware that her activities were creating security concerns and had begun taking steps to modify her approach. Communications that suggest she understood the political dimensions of her relationship with Fayed and was considering ways to manage them more carefully. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. She remembered Diana's final phone calls, the sense that her sister had been wrestling with difficult decisions about her future. Could it be that Diana had known she was in danger, but had been trying to find a way to balance her personal happiness with her public responsibilities? Victoria, who had been quietly observing the exchange, spoke for the first time. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Richardson? Richardson reached into his briefcase and withdrew a leather folder similar to the one Henri had shown Sarah. Complete disclosure of all materials related to Operation Blackbird, including communications that have never been revealed, surveillance footage from Diana's final weeks, and psychological assessments that were conducted to evaluate the security implications of her activities. In exchange for what? Sarah asked. Your agreement to participate in a controlled process for managing how this information becomes public. Not suppression, but responsible disclosure that serves the interests of justice while protecting innocent parties from unnecessary harm. Collins added, we're also prepared to establish a major international foundation in Princess Diana's name, with an endowment of £50 million and ongoing funding that would make it one of the world's most influential humanitarian organizations. The offer was sophisticated and appealing, giving Sarah most of what she wanted while allowing Richardson's organization to maintain control over the narrative and timing of revelations. It would provide some measure of justice for Diana while avoiding the chaos and destruction that complete, immediate disclosure might create. What about Henri Montclair? What happens to him under your proposal? Mr. Montclair receives the medical care and family security we've already offered, plus a formal role in the Foundation as senior advisor on international humanitarian policy. His expertise and conscience become assets rather than liabilities. Sarah realized that Richardson was offering a solution that addressed most of her concerns while protecting his own interests. It wasn't perfect justice, but it might be practical justice that honored Diana's memory while avoiding unnecessary destruction. How would the controlled disclosure work? Richardson opened his folder to reveal what appeared to be a detailed timeline and communication strategy. A phased release over 18 months. Beginning with acknowledgement that security concerns led to operational decisions that inadvertently contributed to the circumstances of Diana's death, followed by revelation of previously classified materials that provide context for those decisions. concluded by establishment of policy reforms to prevent similar situations in the future. Who would control this process? A joint committee including representatives of Diana's family, the British government, and an independent oversight body comprised of respected international figures. The goal would be transparency within a framework that protects legitimate security interests and personal privacy. Sarah studied the proposed timeline, recognizing that it would provide significant transparency while maintaining enough control to prevent the complete chaos that immediate, unmanaged disclosure might create. It wasn't everything she had wanted, but it might be everything that was realistically achievable. What guarantee do I have that this process would be honest and comprehensive? Collins answered. The involvement of independent oversight and the gradual nature of the disclosure would make it very difficult to manipulate or suppress information once the process begins. The political cost of being caught in a cover-up at that point would be too high for any rational actor to risk. Victoria leaned over to whisper in Sarah's ear. It's actually a reasonable proposal. Not ideal, but probably better than either complete disclosure or continued silence. Sarah realized that she was facing the kind of complex moral choice that Diana herself had confronted repeatedly during her final years. Perfect justice was rarely achievable in the real world, but meaningful progress was often possible if one was willing to accept compromise and work within existing systems. I need time to consider your proposal, Sarah said finally. Of course, Richardson replied. But I should mention that Henri Montclair's condition has deteriorated further since yesterday. His doctors believe he has perhaps 2 weeks remaining, which creates some urgency around timing. The implicit pressure was clear, but not threatening. Sarah understood that delays could result in losing the opportunity to achieve any form of justice or disclosure. I'll give you my decision tomorrow morning. Richardson stood to leave, but paused to add one final comment. Lady Spencer, I want you to know that everyone involved in the original operation has lived with regret about the outcome for 25 years. We're not trying to escape accountability. We're trying to find a way to acknowledge what happened while protecting the people and institutions that could be unnecessarily harmed by complete disclosure. As the two men left the cafe, Sarah sat with Victoria in contemplative silence for several minutes. The offer was more generous and reasonable than she had expected, but accepting it would mean abandoning her desire for complete transparency and immediate justice. What do you think? Victoria asked finally. I think they're offering me the best resolution I'm likely to get without destroying a lot of innocent people in the process, Sarah replied. The question is whether that's enough to honor Diana's memory. That evening, Sarah called Henri to discuss the proposal. Despite his declining condition, his voice was clear and his thinking remained sharp. It sounds like they are offering you meaningful acknowledgement and substantial resources to continue Diana's humanitarian work, he observed. That may be more valuable than pure justice, which would primarily serve the past rather than the future. Do you think Diana would accept such a compromise? Henri was quiet for a long moment. I think Diana would focus on what would do the most good for the most people, rather than what would provide the most satisfying revenge. She was always more interested in moving forward than looking backward. The next morning, Sarah called Richardson to accept his proposal with several additional conditions. The foundation would be established immediately. Henri would receive a formal apology along with his compensation, and Sarah would have the right to review all materials before they were released to ensure accuracy and completeness. Richardson agreed to all of her conditions, and within hours, lawyers and government officials from multiple countries were working to implement what would become known as the Diana Princess of Wales Truth and Reconciliation Initiative. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the reception hall of the newly established Diana Foundation headquarters in London, watching Henri Montclair deliver the opening address at their first international conference on humanitarian intervention and political accountability. His cancer treatment had been more successful than expected, giving him several additional months of life that he was dedicating to ensuring the foundation achieved its ambitious goals. The truth about Diana's death was being revealed gradually, in a process that provided accountability while protecting innocent parties from unnecessary harm. The world was learning about the complex political pressures that had contributed to her death, while also celebrating the expansion of her humanitarian legacy through the Foundation's work. Sarah had not achieved perfect justice, but she had achieved something perhaps more valuable, a resolution that honored Diana's memory while contributing to the causes her sister had cared about most. The secret that had begun with a chance encounter in a Manhattan hotel lobby had ultimately led to expanded efforts to protect vulnerable people around the world. As she watched the conference proceedings, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had discovered that sometimes the most meaningful form of justice was not punishment of the guilty, but rather transformation of tragedy into renewed commitment to the principles the victim had represented. Diana's death would always remain a source of sadness and regret, but it was no longer a source of unanswered questions or suppressed truth. The woman who had dedicated her life to helping others was now being honored through an organization that would continue her work for generations to come. Sarah Spencer had kept faith with her sister's memory, not through vengeance, but through the kind of practical compassion that had always characterized Diana's approach to the world's problems. It was, she believed, what her sister would have wanted: truth in service of healing, rather than truth in service of destruction.